Well, later at 11:40, United, a BBC film, recalls the Busby babes in the tragic Munich air disaster. But now the story of the only Irishman to manage United, Frank O'Farrell, the shadow of Busby.
Back in May, Sir Alex Ferguson led Manchester United to a record 19th league title. Ferguson has overseen a period of dominance in English football that has seen United claim 9 domestic cups, 12 Premier League crowns and 2 European Champions League trophies. Now, entering his 70s and his 25th year in charge at Old Trafford, speculation about when the Scot will retire persists. But when the Ferguson era eventually comes to an end, the club faces the enormous challenge of finding a successor to arguably football's greatest ever manager. When Sir Matt Busby stepped down as general manager at Old Trafford in 1971, Manchester United faced the same dilemma. Then it was Cork man Frank O'Farrell who took on the impossible task of replacing the legendary manager who had built the most feared team in Europe from the wreckage of the Munich air disaster.
He said he'd let things go a bit, but weighing all things up, I couldn't turn it down.
Frank's United story is one of boardroom betrayal.
He said, "You fancy the job at Old Trafford?" I said, "You've got a manager." I said, "He's a great friend of mine." He said, "No, but he's getting the sack on Wednesday."
A story of fading stars.
He was just bagging them in left, right and centre, destroying everybody. And just fell off the wagon, didn't it?
This is a story of bruised egos.
I dropped Bobby and he wasn't happy with being dropped. It was a bit of a moaner really in lots of ways.
And of a football legend who couldn't let go.
He said, "I don't think you should have dropped Bobby Charlton." Now he's interfering now.
You can't criticise him for interfering possibly in Frank O'Farrell's job, really. That's if he did interfere.
Matt never interfered in any way whatsoever. Now, if anybody tells you anything different, they're telling a lie.
He said, "Frank is the best signing I ever made." And 15 months after, I got sacked.
This is the story of the Irishman who couldn't escape the shadow of Busby. 84-year-old Frank O'Farrell is the forgotten man of Manchester United. This summer he returned to Old Trafford for the first time since his sacking on the 19th of December 1972, and exactly 40 years since he became the only Irishman to manage the most famous football club in the world.
One can still sort of feel what you would feel on a match day, even in the old stadium when I was here 40 years ago. Players running out and tossing up the coin and the referee blowing the whistle for the start and the heart start pumping then. Great feeling, yeah. Frank O'Farrell, Frank O'Farrell.
Frank's story begins in Cork on the 9th of October 1927. Born the fifth of 8 children and growing up in the Dublin Hill area of the city, he dreamed of being a train driver, just like his father.
The railway was behind the house. I used to go and watch the trains go by, and sometimes he'd whiz by in the engine and he'd sail away then with the steam and the smoke, and he'd give us a wave. I was going to be an engine driver like my father, yeah, and drive the express train between Cork and Dublin, but my life turned out to be completely different.
Frank went to the Presentation Brothers, where he captained the Gaelic football team to glory. But he was already showing some rebel county tendencies.
I was playing soccer, but playing soccer on the QT because the GAA had a ban. If you played Gaelic football, you couldn't play soccer.
It would have been a serious act of rebellion because people who played Gaelic football or hurling were banned from going to soccer matches. There was that kind of apartheid in Irish sport.
When he left school, Frank followed his father onto the railways, but only as a fireman. His dream of driving an engine was yet to be fulfilled. But Frank wasn't complaining, as by now he was also playing semi-professional soccer for Cork United.
They gave me £3 a week, £1 for a win and 10 shillings, which is 50p for a draw. That was the bonus. And then with my railway money and my football money, I'm rich now, you know, I'm enjoying life. 6 months after, the West Ham scout came and asked me if I would sign for West Ham. I said, well, I don't particularly want to go. I'm going to be an engine driver like my father.
The opportunity to be a professional player would have been extremely hard to resist, even if you had, as Frank had, a job and, you know, the extra money from part-time football. I think playing in England was almost irresistible.
I got a signing on fee of £1,000, which was a fortune to me.
That was a big deal. It was 2 years' wages.
So all my ambition to be an engine driver then were finished.
going to England, which was a pretty pagan place, would have been a big culture shock. And in Frank's case in particular, he was a devout Catholic.
I wasn't a typical footballer, but some they go to Hackney races for the Greyhound track or down to West Ham racetrack, and I might go to nightclubs and that, but that wasn't my scene, you know.
Going to England, I think, for all of us who went, would have tested your Catholicism because there was no one to enforce it. You had the option of going to Mass or not, and a lot of us dropped it. But Frank never did.
I went to Mass every Sunday. I got involved in some church things like the Legion of Mary. I did some good work for the Lord at that time, I think, yeah.
He asked me out to see Brigadoon, and I said, well, what do you do? He said, I play football. I said, no. What's your career? Well, no, actually, he said, I really do play football. I'm a professional footballer. My father was Irish, and when I was a wee girl, I used to always say, when I get big like you, Mummy, I'm going to marry an Irishman. Never dreamt, of course, at the time it would all come true.
We've been married 57 years now. She was the best signing I ever made, no doubt about it, yeah.
While at West Ham, the couple had their first child. Frank became club captain, and he was an integral part of West Ham's pioneering Academy of Football.
There was a lot of thinkers in the club. Noel Cantwell, Malcolm Allison, John Bond, Frank himself. There were people who thought about the game and thought the English game was falling behind the rest of the world. They were modernisers, if you like.
They were 2 up when O'Farrell got the ball past Barr.
He would have been regarded as one of the leading Irish professionals in England, very successful, played for Ireland.
It was a great honour to play for Ireland, to be selected and playing with Johnny Carey and Con Martin, Peter Farrell, Tommy Eglinton, you know, great players.
In 1956, he got a big move to First Division title contenders Preston North End, where he played with legend of the game, Tom Finney.
Tom was a plumber by trade. We had clubhouses, and if the washer on the tap was leaking or something, he'd come up with his tool bag. You can imagine asking Wayne Rooney to come around and fix the washer on your tap with his bag, with his tool bag. It wouldn't happen today.
He was an animal of a trainer, was Finney, like, you know. Frank and I sometimes used to sprint with him afterwards, and we could never catch him, but we knew if we got near him, we were pretty sharp ourselves.
Scottish international Tommy Docherty was also a Man United manager of the future. And coincidentally, Frank and the Doc struck up a Celtic comradeship during their playing days at Preston.
Yeah, we were friends, and I was godfather to one of his sons. His wife Agnes at the time was very friendly with Anne and helped her a lot and showed her around Preston.
Footballers' wives those days were not like they are today, because they call them wags and they're all models and beauty queens and goodness knows what. But they say, well, we weren't wags, we were nags. Which is a bit unkind, really, wasn't it?
He came into the side and he was never out of the team for, I think, don't know how long, 6-7 years. Good player, not a player who would stick out like a jewel or a diamond. But you look at the fella who was playing against and say, well, he's not doing a lot today, that particular player. And it was because Frank was playing against him. He was just stuffed out of the game. Nice man, always well-mannered. Yeah, he was a first-class teammate.
They were both leaders, and leaders on the pitch tend to want to go into management or coaching and provide leadership after their playing careers are over.
And when Frank's playing career ended prematurely through injury, his opportunity to move into management came at non-league Weymouth, where he led them to the Southern League title in 1965. 4th Division Torquay United came in for Frank that summer, and the lure of running a league club saw him move down the coast to Devon, but instantly further up the football ladder as he won the league title and promotion to Division 3 in his very first season. Even as a young coach, Frank was earning respect for his firm but fair, no-nonsense approach to player indiscipline, and bringing girls back to the team hotel was certainly not encouraged.
I got up for early mass on Sunday morning, walking along. There was one of my players with a bird on his arm. So we went to mass anyway, and I got back and I called the players together and I said, will the player I saw coming out of the hotel this morning with a bird on his arm, I said, come and see me in my office on Monday morning. Didn't mention any names whatsoever. The joke was going around the dressing room that there was a queue outside Frank's door on Monday morning. I said, if you want to do that again, I said, make sure the manager isn't the Catholic who gets up to early mass on Sunday mornings. When I was at Torquay, I had a number of offers, And then Leicester came in, and I decided that would be the job I wanted.
He was a gentleman. He made things simple, which is what all good managers do. He was a very good talker. He also had a very good assistant in Malcolm Musgrove, who they complemented each other very well.
Frank had joined Leicester in the midst of a relegation battle, and despite struggling to find form in the league, he immediately led them on an FA Cup run that took them all the way to Wembley.
I was the first Irishman to lead a team out at Wembley, and it was a great occasion. I feel very proud of having done it.
Leicester and Manchester City made their appearance in the vast arena for the match which would decide who would capture the glory and that hard-to-get trophy, the FA Cup.
He wished them well, but I never sat and watched them. I was jealous. That should have been me.
FA Cup final in those days was a massive occasion. It was the showpiece occasion of the season, really, and the honour of leading your club out. Particularly if it wasn't a big club like Leicester, it would have been huge.
Unfortunately, Leicester were to lose the cup final by a single goal.
Manchester's moment of glory had arrived.
I was personally devastated. I mean, I'm obviously Leicester born and bred, and I'm sure obviously that Frank O'Farrell was very disappointed as well, but again he knew that we also had a job to do to try and stay in the league.
During Frank's early days in management, Sir Matt Busby was rebuilding Manchester United from the ashes of the Munich air disaster.
For 2 days he lay between life and death with one of his lungs completely deflated. Then came the welcome news. Matt was off the danger list.
Busby's greatest achievement was to come 10 years after the crash. In 1968, United became the first English club to win the European Cup.
Charlton headed it home.
It was a very poignant moment for Busby. It was a fulfilment of an ambition. Once that was achieved, his life's work was done. 1968 was that team at its peak, and I think there was a feeling afterwards that things would never be the same again, because Busby was clearly going to retire.
Journalist David Meek was ghostwriter for Sir Matt in the Manchester Evening News and was close to the Busby regime.
When he decided that it was time to go, it was because he couldn't bring up the ruthlessness that a manager must have to say to Bobby Charlton and those players, well, that's it for you lot, on your bikes. Because they were his friends now.
In 1969, Matt Busby announced he would be retiring at the end of the season. Leicester City's fight for survival in the top flight had gone right to the wire, and it was defeat to Manchester United in Busby's last game in charge that saw Frank's Foxes relegated to Division 2.
I went in the boardroom after and Matt said, don't worry Frank, it's how you come back from setbacks that matters.
It was strange really, because there we got relegated at Manchester United, and 2 years after I was going to be the manager.
Sir Matt entrusted the job of first team coach to an original Busby babe, Wilf McGuinness.
I was so proud that he chose me, and I'll always be proud of that. You can't take that away, that I was the one he chose to follow him.
When he stood down as manager, everybody was disappointed, not just the players, but the supporters as well were disappointed. They thought that Matt would go on forever.
Replacing Sir Matt Busby at that time was a very difficult situation. He was like your father. Because he looked after you, he'd have a drink with us after games. It was all out of respect. We used to love going to work, playing for Manchester United and working for Sir Matt Busby.
Despite stepping away from the day-to-day management of the first team, Sir Matt had stayed on as general manager, crucially retaining control of club discipline and transfers.
Looking back, I wish we could have got more players, because certain players weren't quite good enough and other players were maybe past the best.
So Matt sort of stood loyal to the people who had won the European Cup, and he still thought, you know, he could get more out of them. Wolf played with half the team that played at that time, and they'd have nights out and all that sort of thing, so it must have been very difficult for him to be strict with people that were his pals.
He was given a job. Liverpool were doing exactly the same thing from the back room, and it had paid off, but unfortunately for Wilf, it didn't pay off.
Success is taken by what you win, and it wasn't successful, unfortunately.
In December 1970, 2 days after Christmas, Wilf was sacked.
When it did end, it was a big upset for me. Obviously, this is the club I've always loved, and I wanted to stay as long as I could here.
So Matt actually came back into the job when Wilf was relieved of his duties. That was like more of the old team going to Sir Matt and saying things aren't happening, we're not enjoying our football, we're not playing well.
Sir Matt, you've said before that you were retiring. Do you really mean it this time?
Oh yes, well I meant it the first time too, but unfortunately situations developed whereby the directors asked me to fill a gap for a period of time. But I can assure you this time it's the end. It is the end. I won't certainly entertain it again.
Matt Busby was in sole charge at Old Trafford again, but only until the end of the season. The search for a long-term successor from outside the club was now on.
Anyone that was going to come in, you know, there was going to be pressure on. After winning the European Cup, after everything what he had done since the Munich days, the question was branded about how do you follow Sir Matt Busby? And it was going to be very, very difficult.
We were very concerned about who was going to be the next manager because we were all internationals, but we also knew some of us were coming to the end of our careers.
I don't think anybody's impossible to replace, really. He's a man, he's only a man. The person who takes over will have to be just equally as good, I'm afraid.
There was some speculation about who was going to be manager of Manchester United after Wolf McGuinness left, and my name was one of the names that was mentioned in the paper. I didn't take much note of it, really.
Anyone who had achieved some distinction in football would have been in the fray for the job.
People like Jock Stein, Don Revie, names like that were branded about. More mature and more experienced managers.
I know Jock met Matt, and from what I gather, he agreed to come and then changed his mind. And Matt asked me to speak to Dave Sexton, which I did speak to Dave Sexton. And Dave wouldn't come. He was manager of Chelsea at the time. I put him in touch with Matt anyway, and whatever happened, I don't know.
Jock Stein and others would have considered it impossible to follow Busby and would have looked at the Wilf McGuinness era and seen the dangers of it.
With some big names spurning United's advances, Frank's credentials were growing. Busby had been watching his progress at Leicester with interest and was an open admirer of how he handled disputes with star players.
Frank was renowned for his strength of character. He was a devout Catholic, and Manchester United had a Catholic vibe about it. Busby himself was a Catholic, and that would have appealed to Busby.
When Frank led Leicester City to the Second Division Championship that season, Busby made his move.
I had a call from Matt Busby, and he said, "I'd like to meet you," he said. I said, "Well, I could meet you down in London." He said, "Well, no, people might see us. There's a lot of football people down there, and there's journalists around." So I arranged to meet him at my house in Leicester. He said, "We're interested in you becoming the manager," he said. And he spelled it out for me. He said, he'd let things go a bit.
Frank asked him, would you like a drink? So he said he would. So Frank went into where we had the drink, as it were, in the dining room. And he said, "I'm telling you now," he said, "it will take 5 years at least," he said, "for Frank to get the club right."
He explained to me he was going to be a director and he wasn't going to be involved in football. And it's a 5-year contract. If you win the league, you get this bonus. If you win the cup, you get X bonus. The salary was $12,000 a year.
He would have taken great reassurance from the length of the contract. Yeah, it's hugely important because you don't transform a football club, he would have known overnight.
With the approval of the Leicester board, Frank arranged a second meeting with Sir Matt and Manchester United chairman, Louis Edwards.
The Rolls Royce came in, I recognised Louis was driving and Matt was in the car. Funny setting for Rolls Royce and a lay-by down in Arborina. And I got in the car and he introduced me to the chairman. I said, "Can you repeat the terms again, Matt?" And he said, "Yeah, 5-year contract. The salary is 12,000. This was the crucial point. Louis, the chairman, said, "No, Matt," he said, "you got that wrong. It's 15. "Oh, sorry, I got that wrong." No, you don't get the salary wrong. He might get a bonus for winning the European Cup or something like that. You don't get the salary wrong. He was sent to negotiate with me, the first meeting, to negotiate a 5-year contract at £15,000 a year. He didn't do that. He offered me 12. Now, I don't know why he did that.
Being a canny Scot, like myself, he would probably try and get Frank as cheaply as he could. Nothing wrong with that.
Frank's suspicions were later confirmed by Jimmy Murphy, Matt's former assistant manager.
I was telling Jimmy Murphy the story sometime later. He said, "I know that's true, Frank." He said, "Because Matt told me," he said, "I could have got Frank for 12, but that big stupid bugger told him it was 15. He's talking about his old chairman that way.
Louis would have been the more expansive and the more generous in that situation. He could well have said, "Okay, Matt, let's, push the boat out for this guy." And Matt would have been more prudent.
I had to weigh up then whether I should take it or cut it off and say, "No, I'm not going." But then how can you say that? Like, you've been offered the biggest job in the country. And that's why you You started at Weymouth all those years ago and you worked your way up to get an opportunity like that. Weighing all things up, I couldn't turn it down.
So despite a niggling doubt about Sir Matt, Frank couldn't say no to the biggest job in football. And the O'Farrell family packed up and moved north. But when Frank arrived at Old Trafford, he discovered the new junior director had no plans to move up to the boardroom.
He said he was staying on in the manager's office. I said, Matt, that's not right. The press had been speculating that nobody will come here while you're there. Why are you hanging on to the manager's office?
This summer, Cork man Frank O'Farrell returned to Old Trafford for the first time since being sacked as Manchester United manager 38 years ago.
It's so impressive. It's a wonderful stadium. I'd like to be here on a match day and feel that atmosphere which I felt all those years ago in the older stadium.
In 1971, O'Farrell was handpicked by legendary United manager Sir Matt Busby, who was passing on the reins of power for the second time in just 2 years. Wilf McGuinness had been sacked after only 18 months for failing to bring the success the club had grown accustomed to under Busby. But Frank arrived in Manchester with the reassurance of a 5-year mandate to rebuild a declining team.
Frank was a good choice. He was the outstanding candidate of those who were available. He was a man of substance. He had a good CV at that point, and I think they thought that he could become another Matt Busby.
On his first official day in the job, Sir Matt took Frank and his wife Anne on a tour of the club, including the Cliff, United's first-team training ground at the time. 4 decades later, Frank has come back to have a look around.
This is the dining room. When I came that first visit to the Cliff, it was nice to see Paddy Creran turn up and Dennis Lowe, and I met them. I was introduced to them by Matt Busby. We sat over there on the table, and Anne was here with me as well.
The first people I met was Paddy Creran and Dennis Lowe. They seemed quite nice people.
I didn't really know Frank. Nobody knew him, as it happens, when he came here. And he came to the training ground at the Cliff, and him and his wife, they were very, very nice, maybe too nice.
Next, Frank was off to Old Trafford to be paraded before the press.
I came out here first day, and Matt Busby, God rest his soul, he was here with me, showing me the stadium, and said, "It's all yours, Frank. Maybe for only 18 months, but it's all yours."
But when Frank was shown to the manager's office at the stadium, it appeared that the now junior director was still attached to his old job.
He said there's a small office down the corridor. That'll be for you, Frank. He was staying on in the manager's office. I said, Matt, that's not right. And it's not going to look right. I said, the press had been speculating that nobody will come here while you're there. Why are you hanging on to the manager's office? Okay, he said, I'll move my stuff out.
Frank O'Farrell did the right thing by saying that and showing that he was the manager. There was no team manager or general manager. He was the manager of Manchester United.
Jimmy Murphy, sometime after, he said, how the hell did you get him out of there? I said, I told him that was the manager's office and you shouldn't be there. He said, you did well. So he obviously didn't want to give it up.
It was a silly thing to do now. What difference does it make if he's in the office or not? What difference does it make? I mean, don't forget, Matt was in that office when Alex Ferguson became manager here.
When the players returned for pre-season training, Frank and his assistant, Malcolm Musgrove, made an instant impact on the first-team squad.
The first day of training, we got everybody lined up and they sat on the bank. It was a lovely day. Introduced ourselves. We got down to training. I was a new man coming in, so the way I would do things would be different to what the previous one would do. They responded well. There was an enthusiasm there, which was reflected really in the results that we got at the beginning of the season.
In it comes again for Law to jump. It is onside, and that's one.
It was a different regime at the time. It was a better regime.
Charlton, now there it goes.
It's something new. It was something different. It was a different way of playing the Manchester United way.
Changed the team around. Alan Gowling was a centre forward and I converted him into a midfield player. And adjusted Willie Morgan's position, and Dennis Law had a good start to the season.
Law! Oh, yes!
For a while they played some great football It was good to watch. It was a flavour of what Frank O'Farrell was capable of.
Frank was putting his own stamp on the team and was looking to the younger players to keep the experienced stars on their toes.
Frank showed faith in me and gave me my debut, and I'm ever so grateful for that, against Manchester City in such a great big game, derby game. Well, your first goal is always your most memorable goal. I could have ran out of the ground, to be honest with you. I felt that good.
Sammy was one of the better quality young players that I had in the club, and there wasn't enough of them to bring into the club.
There were some young kids coming through, not a lot to be fair, not as many in the time where I actually came through that had happened years previous.
The results were good, and that's the thing at a football club. If the results are good, other little niggles sort of get pushed in the background, but they're always there.
The mercurial George Best was playing at the top of his game and was instrumental in taking United to the top of the table and 5 points clear of the field by December.
George had one of these subliminal 4 months or something, and he was just bagging them in left, right and centre, destroying everybody. He had a golden era then, that period of time under Frank. And George fell off the wagon, didn't he? Unfortunately.
He was the key, really. There's no doubt about it. He was carrying the team. Once he started drifting away and not turning up, then it complicated things.
All of a sudden a football player's front page news, that was unheard of then. I mean, it's common now, but it was unheard of then.
You had your greatest player, but you had your greatest problem all in one package. There were bulbs flashing and large headlines anytime George moved offside. I don't think Frank was prepared for this. Nothing in his football experience had prepared him for this.
The huge press interest in George was beginning to consume every part of Frank's life, even back at the O'Farrell home.
I went to get the milk one morning, and there was a whole gang of press people there. Where's Georgie? Where's Georgie? I shut the door.
I mean, the number of times that Frank sent me searching for George. I knew every bolt hole in Manchester, but I still couldn't find George.
George was, getting sick, becoming an alcoholic, and had all kinds of problems in his life.
The downturn in results was definitely down to George going astray. There's no question about that. He was unlucky, Frank.
There'd be a lot of press people around there. It's quite a big area, and especially if George had gone away. They found it out, and then you'd have more of them around. They wanted a story then. And I didn't even know where he was sometimes. He just went away and he came back, and you couldn't deal with it until he came back. They wanted to interview him as well, but he didn't often give interviews. He probably couldn't explain his behaviour anyway. And that was a distraction as well. That shouldn't have been at the football club. We come here to train, not to discuss George Best's whereabouts.
Do you feel he has been under considerable pressure in the last few weeks or not? Are there genuine pressures on him?
He has had some problems, yes, and I've been trying to help him with those, but they tend to get on top of George more than anybody else, and instead of facing them, he tends to opt out a little bit. This is something that's part of George, and it's something he's aware of, and something that we must try and continually help him to overcome.
Frank was quite fond of him, as it were. He thought he was quite a nice boy, really. He was just had too much too soon.
I tried to help him. He bought a big house down in Cheshire, and he was living there on his own, which wasn't a good scenario for him.
Frank O'Farrell is hoping that George Best will settle down for the rest of the season at number 9, Aycliffe Avenue, Chorlton-cum-Hardy. Mr. O'Farrell feels that George Best at the moment is lonely and needs someone to come home to at night.
How do you think he'll react at having to leave home and go and live in digs again?
I don't suppose he'll like that. There's nobody would in that position.
Frank's decision to try and help George, rather than discipline him, did not go down well with other senior players.
I remember Brian Kidd saying to me once, there's one set of rules for George Best and another set of rules for the rest of us. So there was dissension in the ranks. It wasn't one for all and all for one. And I think you'll find that any successful football team has a team ethic.
Bobby Charlton and George Best didn't get on. Bobby would have been very frustrated by the way George behaved and the licence he was given, I'm sure of that.
Bobby would have a little moan, maybe more than others, what Bobby's been through and what he's been through with Sir Matt Busby. He probably didn't like it more than anyone, what was happening with George. Was he hurting the name of Manchester United? And probably Bobby took this on board and maybe went to Frank and said, listen, you know, we're going to have to try and sort this out.
Bobby Charlton would get frustrated with George, and we'd practice free kicks, and then when the free kick happened, George would do something differently. And Bobby Charlton would come in maybe at half-time and full-time moaning about, I said, look, I can't do anything when the free kick has been taken. You played for England 100 times, you're the captain, push him out of the bloody way. I said, and that's the way to cure him. Get him out of it. If he's not involved in it, get him out of it. But don't come in moaning after it happens. You're the captain out there, you deal with it. I can't go on the pitch and push him out of the way. I was a bit frustrated with Bobby. He was a bit of a moaner, really, in lots of ways. Yeah.
Frank had been reluctant to drop his star player, but when George's misdemeanours continued, he saw an opportunity to motivate his underperforming team.
I decided to drop him that day for the Wolves game, and I went out and told the other players, look, you moan about him now, win without him, and it makes my job easier then. We lose 2-0 at home to Wolves. And that was their dilemma. The team wasn't good enough without him.
With no league win in 9 games, by the end of February, United were in freefall. So Frank looked for reinforcements on the transfer market.
I signed Martin Buchan, and who went on to become a great player and gave many great years service.
Martin Buchan was a class act and a tremendous centre-back, and turned out to be a great captain. So they seem to be going on the right lines.
O'Farrell also had his sights set on talented Nottingham Forest forward Ian Storey-Moore, but to secure his signing, Frank would have to get the better of football's most controversial character, Old Big Ed, Brian Clough.
I heard on the grapevine that Manchester United did have an interest in me. We started to discuss terms, and I think the bottom line is we couldn't actually come to some agreement.
Ian got a phone call from someone and they never came back.
Brian Clough asked me where I was. I said I'm at this hotel in the Nottingham area, which he knew. And he said to me, just wait there, we'll be over in half an hour.
I'm not aware of any undertaking is broken whatsoever. He's a Derby player and was a Derby player at, let's see, approximately 7 o'clock last night.
Cloughie just kidnapped him and paraded him around the baseball ground saying he'd signed.
Why do you think it's being suggested that you are now undertaking to Manchester United?
I don't know anything about that at all. All I know is that I've joined a great club.
Farrell, are you still after Ian Moore?
I got people who I knew down in that area to try and trace him. Eventually we got him back and he came to United.
Well, the committee have held a meeting and they say the deal is now off. What do you have to say?
Not interested in what Notts Forest committee have to say at all.
To say the least, it was rather embarrassing. I mean, I didn't really know what was happening. Naturally, you believe Brian Clough. I mean, he was a bit of an icon in the game, wasn't he?
Please do not waste my time again asking me the same questions.
Storey-Moore, outstanding signing. Great player, great winger, great goal scorer. No doubt about that.
Now, what a goal, Ian Moore! 3 games, 3 goals. Well, looking every inch, £200,000 on that break.
Frank's new signings had settled in quickly, but the damage to the season had already been done. Title contenders at Christmas, United finished a disappointing 8th.
Not bad, but not great. I mean, the standard's been set by Matt Busby at Manchester United. You've got to be up there fighting for whatever. You've got to get close.
So much more would be expected of Frank's second season in charge. And if he was to deliver, it was looking like he'd have to do it without his star player.
Journalists asked me, George is in Spain, are you going out to get him? I said, no. I said, I'll see him when he comes back.
40 years ago, Irishman Frank O'Farrell was manager of the most famous football club in the world. After leading Manchester United to the top of the table at Christmas 1971, Frank's honeymoon period was ended by the disappearance of star player George Best. Their title challenge fizzled out, but with some shrewd new signings and a good end to his first season, Frank was optimistic about the future. And then, Best went missing again.
Journalists asked me, George is in Spain, are you going out to get him? I said, no. I said, I'm not going to do St. Teresa of Avila, who went around in a donkey and cart reforming her Order of Carmel. I said, I'll see him when he comes back.
George failed to show for an end-of-season tour, and from a sun lounger in Marbella, he announced he was quitting football forever. But his retirement was short-lived. When he returned for pre-season training, Frank gave him one last chance, but not without reprimand.
Manager Frank O'Farrell saw him privately. He told him of the decision which will mean losing his domestic freedom, £400 in wages, and missing the club's 4-match pre-season tour. Do you really feel deep down inside yourself that this is going to work this time?
I don't know. I haven't the foggiest idea. I've got no crystal ball. I would hope that George, at some stage, for the first time, might respond to somebody who's trying to be helpful and constructive to him.
The club have made a decision, and they think it's the right decision. So it's up to me to prove that they made the right one. And the only way I can do it is on the football pitch.
George disappearing now and again became a bigger problem than with me, and it would be a big blow to Frank O'Farrell.
I was talking to Paddy Crayon about it, and I said he needs some place where there's a family and it might have an influence on him, a supervision, and he offered to take him in.
He came in my house for a period of time, but it was too late. And it must have been very difficult for Frank because Frank tried everything. But he wasn't the only manager that tried everything. Matt tried to help him.
He didn't just stop misbehaving when I went there. And if someone like Matt Busby, who brought him on and had that authority and that father figure in the club, if he couldn't help him, nobody else could.
Frank's second season got off to a disastrous start. After 8 games without a win, he reached for the chequebook to try and kickstart United's campaign. But new signings Wyn Davis and Ted McDougall were not universally accepted.
Wyn Davis, nah, not for me. He lacked one thing, ability. Ted McDougall, nah. Every time he passed the ball, he used to shout, "To whom it may concern." They weren't good enough.
Some of the old guard didn't welcome him in because they were taking their places anyway.
Signed players like Wyn Davis and other players that weren't Manchester United standard. Ted McDougall from, dear God, I'm not so sure who guided him along those steps.
How do you replace a Dennis Law, a Paddy Crayon, a George Best? He brought in his people. McDougall and Story Moore all were brought in, good players. But, you know, to replace a Dennis Law and a Bobby Charlton, very difficult.
When Ted McDougall came into the team, the man he was asked to replace was United's longest-serving player and club captain, Bobby Charlton.
He wasn't happy with being dropped, but whether the player accepts it or not, that's another matter. You do what's best for the club. But Bobby didn't accept being dropped.
Knowing Bobby, he definitely wouldn't have been happy with it. But, again, it was Frank's decision, and you have to get on with it.
He knew himself that possibly somewhere along the line, because of the fan base and supporters and what Bobby Charlton was for Manchester United, it would come back and haunt him to a certain extent.
The dropping of Bobby Charlton was to prove pivotal, as it was at a club function soon after that Busby first made it known that he disapproved of the way Frank was managing the team. But not to Frank, to his wife Anne.
He called me over to him and he said, "Anne," he said, "your husband Frank," he said, "is a very independent, bastard," he said, "and he shouldn't be. He should come to me and ask me, you know, about these things and who he's playing, who he's not playing." But I said, "Well, that's not Frank."
I was annoyed, really. I should be taking stories through my wife. She has a home to run. So I waited around for him on Monday and I said, "Matt, Anne told me I was an independent. You said I was an independent sod and I should come and talk to you." Here I am. You know, what do I got to say? He said, "I don't think you should have dropped Bobby Charlton." No, he's interfering now. He's not the junior director now. He's interfering with what I'm doing.
Sometimes when things go wrong, you blame MD or anything. He certainly didn't interfere. I know that he definitely did not.
Bobby Charlton was like a son to Matt Busby, and he didn't want him left out. So he's having a go at Frank about it, very undermining.
If you have any problems, I said, or any criticism, they should be aired in the boardroom where everybody hears them. I don't know why he went to Anne. He shouldn't have done it. He obviously wanted to get the message to me, but there was no reason whatsoever that whenever I was in the ground at the same time as he could have said, "Frank, can I have a word with you?" And I'd be very happy to go and talk to him about whatever he wanted to talk to him. But he shouldn't have gone through my wife and implicate her in football politics. He was quite out of order.
I cannot believe that you've got Sir Matt Busby here at the club and you're the manager of a football club and you don't go to him for advice. Alex Ferguson has on more than one occasion. You can ask Alex, and Alex has said that on television loads of times. When he had little problems, he went and spoke to Matt. Why not? He'd been there, done it, seen it, been in football for God knows how many years. Why not?
He knew, I think, I was a man of principle. If I saw something wrong, I would address it. and I think that probably might have intimidated him a little bit, and he went away the back door to do things then.
Some of the senior players are your players. To them, you will always be boss.
Yes, but I agree with that, probably. But I say that the players are players all over the world, and they accept other people. They're not fools, you know. They have enough sense to know that if the change is made, that is their new boss, and they've got to do what they can for him.
But they found it difficult to do that, Sir Matt, haven't they?
This is the thing that was around. I don't know. I don't know.
Some of the players used to call Matt Boss. I mean, that was okay, and that's how they always knew him. And I had no problem with that. The only problem I had is if he was giving sympathy to somebody who wasn't in the team, and letting the player think that he wouldn't have made that decision and dropping them, then that's interfering with my job.
Willie Morgan and Dennis, who I had in the national team, they were talking to other players about it. Well, if they were left out of the team, I know full well that they went to Sir Matt.
The old school had this great empathy with Sir Matt. Dennis and Bobby and Paddy and Willie Morgan, to a lesser effect, that they probably resented a new broom coming in, so to speak.
Matt had a great camaraderie with the lads from the 60s who were still there, and loved his golf. He used to take us on golf trips.
He played golf from time to time with the players, and when you're on the golf course, you exchange how you feel, and there's chit-chat and there's gossip, isn't there, really?
This is a social thing, but it undermines the manager if his players are playing golf with a member of the board. It just doesn't work.
When the team was doing poorly and half the team are out playing golf with Sir Matt, as a manager myself, maybe I'd have a little bit of a worry about it, what they're talking about. Are they undermining me as a manager? You would definitely have that thought in your mind, there's no doubt about that.
That was all rubbish, that. No, I don't believe that for 1 minute. You could talk about me being close to Sir Matt. Of course I was close to Sir Matt. I grew up at Manchester United with him. The players that, of course they were close to Matt. Matt never made a decision all the time, Frank O'Farrell was saying. If anybody tells you anything different, they're telling a lie.
He was interfering. I could understand him being close to the players, but he shouldn't have listened to the players. He should have said, go to the manager. He's the one to sort it out. Go and sort it out with him.
After his run-in with Sir Matt, Frank's United continued to struggle.
And it's in, a mistake by Stepney, and it's an own goal by Buchan. Bell, in!
That heavy defeat to local rivals Manchester City triggered more bad behaviour from George Best. Frank's patience with George had finally run out. He was suspended and placed on the transfer list. The vultures were beginning to circle in the English press, but Frank still had some support in the media.
The directors were turning against Frank, and I wrote an article in the paper when I sensed that they were about to sack him, or thinking of sacking him, and the headline said it all. It said, "Be fair to Frank."
David came here as a newspaper reporter for the Manchester Evening News after the crash in '58. He'd done this article as if it was the directors were to blame, which obviously they weren't, because any manager that's been at this football club's had free rein to do whatever he wanted.
Within a few days of that article appearing, the club wrote officially to my editor and said that David Meat was no longer welcome to travel on the team bus.
The axe loomed larger than ever when Frank's pal from his Preston days, Scotland manager Tommy Docherty, attended a crunch game at Crystal Palace.
I was there for Scotland purposes, in fairness. I come down and they forgot to leave me my tickets. And I met Frank in the corridor when I arrived with the team bus. He said, "What are you doing here, Thomas?" "I'm going down to see the left back at Crystal Palace. Bert Head has left me a couple of tickets." I said, "But he's forgotten, they're not here." He says, "Here's two." Frank gave me two complimentary tickets for the game, sitting right behind Sir Matt and Louis Edwards.
The ball back for Mulligan. Here's a chance and a goal!
They got murdered that day. Sir Matt says, "Could have seen the boardroom after the game."
They must have been contemplating sacking me the following week, but the logical sort of conclusion is that they must have sounded him, "Would you be available if we decide?" I mean, that's the way things tend to happen in football.
He said, "Do you fancy the job at Old Trafford?" I said, "You've got a manager." I said, "He's a great friend of mine. He's godfather to one of my kids, and I'm godfather to one of his." He said, "I know, but he's getting the sack on Wednesday." Felt awful. So sad for him, like, you know, because I knew the job was mine if I wanted it. And I thought, shall I tell him?
He must have gone back to to Scotland and made himself available when the call came.
After just 18 months of his 5-year contract, time had run out for Frank.
I got summoned to a board meeting, and it was a lovely sunny day, 19th of December. I did say at the time, it's a lovely day for an execution. Matt didn't say anything at the board meeting. Just the chairman and he said, we're terminating your contract. And I said, for what reason? He said, for no reason. I said, I can't go out of this room not knowing why I'm sacked. I said, I got to have a reason. And he said, we're bottom of the league. We weren't actually, we were third from bottom.
Louis Edwards really was purely Matt Busby's frontman. The real decisions were coming from Matt still.
What he'd said before, and 5 years to me and 18 months is quite a lot of difference, isn't there? It was quite unfair.
This is the second time I've had to come in to fill a gap until an appointment is made. So one feels that one is getting a bit tired of it all.
So it was Christmas week and the turkey never came.
Well, it's a favourite time, isn't it? I always give you a Christmas present, don't I?
Cast out of the club the same day was George Best, the player whose personal decline had gone hand in hand with that of Frank's team. 4 days later, Tommy Docherty was unveiled as United's new manager, and Frank began legal action against the club.
One would have expected a club like Manchester United saying, well, we made a mistake, let's pay him up and start afresh and finish on as good terms as you possibly can, but they didn't do that. And there was no money forthcoming, and I had to go and see a solicitor.
During legal proceedings, Frank was obliged to seek employment.
I never signed on the dole in my life, I'd never done that. But I was a bit afraid the press might get a hold of me with a picture going in or the labour exchange.
Sometimes I used to go with him because he hated to go there on his own. It was completely alien to his self.
The manager was very kind, actually. He knew who I was and he used to let me in the back way quietly, and I signed on.
After 9 months, Manchester United settled out of court.
QC said if they want to go to court, he said they'll have to go in the witness box and be witnesses, and they have to be cross-examined on the reasons why they sacked you. He said, and I'll cross-examine them, he said, and they won't escape from me. They didn't want any adverse publicity with the public watching, no way. The club has a great reputation and so on, but the people I was dealing with at that time weren't very nice people. And they were vindictive and punitive and nasty people they were. And Matt Busby was one of the worst of them.
He didn't like Manchester United and the way that they dealt with him. And because Matt was such a power with Manchester United, that meant that really a lot of his disappointment was centred around Matt.
I have a very poor opinion of Matt Busby. I'm not taking away what he's achieved as a manager, but as a person, he doesn't come out top of my list of good people.
With his case settled, Frank took his chance to get back into management in the second division, leading relegation-threatened Cardiff City to safety in 1974. Whilst weighing up a long-term contract with Cardiff, Frank was offered an opportunity to make a fresh start in Iran.
They were staging the Asian Games in Tehran. I went out there to have a look around, and I said I'd take it.
5 years before the Islamic Revolution, he began a football revolution in the country, leading the national team to glory in the Asian Games.
That was the first time a Middle East team had won the Asian Games in football. It was great celebrations, and I was a national hero.
When Frank returned from Iran, he settled back on the south coast of England and had 2 further stints as manager of Torquay, where he continues to live in retirement today. Aged 84, his coaching skills are now saved for his great-grandson, and he still plays an active role in the Catholic Church.
The trip to Iran was very beneficial to me because it took me away from the local scene and claustrophobia about football. When I came back, I had an offer of the Newcastle United job. I thought, no, I'll put Anne first this time. The bad experience I had at United, I thought, well, 18 months, there might be another 18 months up in Newcastle if it don't go well. And then you've got to find a home somewhere else then again.
He wouldn't do it for my sake Although I would never have said no, of course, and I think he knew that as well. I would probably preferred him to take it, and I was quite upset really and went into a sort of period of depression, as it were.
I didn't want it again, I didn't want it to happen to me again. And I didn't want to put my wife, because they suffer, your wife and children suffer as well. And it's all in the public eye, and I wanted a different life, really, and I haven't regretted it now.
Frank's decision to pull out of football was football's loss. He would have been a top manager, up there with Brian Clough, Don Revie, Matt Busby. But they didn't give him the time, and it hurt him and disillusioned him.
When you're managing big players, you have to have a strong character and a good character. And I didn't think Frank was a strong character. I thought he was too nice a man to be a football manager.
Oh, as a person, he's top class. He's none nicer than Frank as a person. He deserved a lot better than the cards have been dealt him. Yeah, very much so.
I had a bad experience at United, and that hurt me. Because the people that did it to me, they were regarded as good people, and they didn't turn out to be very good.
I can never understand why all this is put that I am, as if I was interfering. I've never even interfered except support. No, not interfere, but support.
In October of 1971, when we had a good start, he wrote a piece in the Daily Mirror, and he said, "Frank is the best signing I ever made." And 15 months after, I got sacked in December '72.
When somebody of that stature leaves the job but stays in the club, the shadow is there. Frank could never transform it into his club while Matt Busby was there.
You can't criticise him for interfering possibly in Frank O'Farrell's, Wolf McGuinness's job, really. You can't criticise him. He should really have not interfered. That's if he did interfere.
I don't think anybody could have managed Manchester United at that time successfully. When Tommy Docherty succeeded Frank, the soap opera continued. They ended up in Division 2. Nobody could stop that.
At the end of the day, when you look back at it, he wasn't good enough. That's the whole factor about it. It wasn't good enough to be the manager of Manchester United. You can talk all day about, did he get badly treated? Was he treated this way, that way, or whatever way? At the end of the day, he wasn't successful, and that was the reason he had to go.
I'm sitting here and reflect and look back, and very happy that my name is in the books, that I managed Manchester United, and we were top of the league in the first season I was there. And that's a nice place to have been with Manchester United. In the mainstream of things, it worked out all right till I had the run-in with the great Sir Matt, because I was an independent sod. I still am an independent sod, but people might not recognise it, My wife thinks I'm an independent sod sometimes, I think, and does. Yeah. She's put up with me for 57 years now.
And stay right there. Next in one, David Tennant and Dougray Scott star in the BBC film of the Busby Babes, which recalls the Munich air disaster and the challenges facing the remaining team and the community. United is on the way.